where right versus left, concrete versus tundra, zealots versus dogmatic. One man steps into the gauntlet of rhetoric with flags of justice, truth, and honor, with a new vision for the last frontier and the courage to tell all Alaskans, bring it on. This is the Tom Anderson Show on the Talk of the Valley from 4 to 6 p.m. on KVNT 92.5 FM and 1020 AM. From Matsu to Anchorage, phone lines are open. Dial 357-5868 and join the conversation. Weigh in on the Valley's most popular news and political forum. Are you ready to rumble? Here's Tom Anderson.
Well, greetings, folks, and welcome to another edition of Science Friday here in Alaska, in Canada, online on the internet at tomandersonshow.com. You can stream us live if you happen to be driving in rush hour or on your iPad or on your smartphone and decide to want to listen on the computer. Allison Van Eck here with me, friend of hers, someone with certainly national, if not international, acclaim because of his theories. Ted Holden is forthcoming. Folks, it's the end of 2014, and if you look back, we've talked about the Rosetta mission landing on a comet, 67P, little Philae. We've talked about the birth of birds. Think of this, the huge Tyrannosaurus Rex into the agile hummingbird. Is that true or not? Maybe graceful swan. Evolutionists, biologists are suggesting such. I don't know if I buy it. Robots that cooperate, chips that mimic our brain. How about the world's oldest cave, 40,000 years old? Found 500,000-year-old shells with stars carved in them in Indonesia, Java. I've been to that island. Allison, so many different things happening this year. Every year is abundant, plethora of science news, but that's made Science Friday with you, I think, engaging and fun. And in this case, we have an author, a human origin theorist, computer expert, your friend, Ted Holden. And tell me what inspired you to have him come on the show when you first met him. Then we'll get into Ted's background, who's patiently waiting for the interview.
Well, he drew attention to facts, biological facts about the comparisons of animals, specifically animals we all look at as evidence of evolution. And there's been a lot of discussion of how apes moved through a Neanderthal stage, and here we are. And fine. I always took that for granted. I've defended evolution a lot of times, going back to my science book from high school and arguing with friends who are Christians and them getting upset and me, being very indignant. And I kind of took a step back when Mr. Holden sat his book in front of me and flipped me through a couple pages and very cogently explained his point that the eye sockets would have had to have moved and shrunk, and certain key adaptations of what it would mean to live on a planet like Earth miraculously just disappeared. Things we could have used, like claws, fur, and fangs, things like that. During an ice age, we lost these attributes. And I'm starting to think, wow, okay, so I'm never, ever going to take something that somebody tells me as the gospel just because they say it, and I'm never going to look at somebody as having all the right answer now. So you don't refute and you don't accept, you research it yourself. And what did your research briefly find out? That maybe he has some credibility in his theories? I can't refute the comparisons I saw. I would be interested to talk to the fellas running the college programs on these facts and hear what they have to say without them getting snarky. I'd like to hear their answer, and I would like to refute that answer if able. I honestly think that it's worth looking at. Well, his name is Ted Holden, folks, and we want to welcome him online here in Alaska, in Canada. He's the author of Cosmos and Collision, the prehistory of our solar system and of modern man. And he's a human origin theorist. He's a lot more than that. And Ted Holden, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing all right. I'm glad to be on your show. It's an interesting show.
It certainly is, my friend. We've had Richard Hoagland on 3 times, and he's had the whole 2 hours. So you're the only other human, speaking of humans, that have captured us enough to be on the entire Science Friday show, and we welcome that. Why don't you tell me a little, and I know you have so much in that brain of yours, and I think the public, and when we place this in a video on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, they're going to be enthralled, intrigued, maybe research you, and I bet you some will be optimistic and hopeful that you publish more books forthcoming. But tell me about your interest in these theories. What was the, I hate to use the word, the pun, origin, since that's the title of your book, and your theories, but tell me about the background and the genesis of Ted Holden being interested in this facet.
It goes back to the time after I'd gotten out of college in the early 70s. Okay, and I'd first read a couple of Immanuel Velikovsky's books and had attended that big seminar up at McMaster University, which Walt Thornhill and David Talbot and a number of the other people whose names come up with the Thunderbolts group speak of having attended, right? I was there also. And I had heard in discussions about the Saturn thesis at that point. I was just completely blown away by that, and had made a sort of a hobby out of this sort of thing. Now, I've never done this kind of thing for a living. Okay, I mean, I'm by profession, I'm a computer scientist, a software developer. Sorry, my college degrees were in mathematics, and most math majors minor in physics. Right, physics. I was not really interested in it at the time. I'm minored in modern languages. I have coursework equivalent to another bachelor's degree in Russian language, which gives you another sort of perspective on some of these things, right? Nonetheless, I have a number of things which I regard as hobbies, which don't pay the rent, and this is one of them. The study of ancient realities and prehistory is what I would call a hobby. I've had one sort of a thing which made nationwide television in Japan on prime time, which had to do with the nature of gravity itself and with the question of dinosaurs. And the people who had studied this in the late 1800s understood that there was a problem with anything as large as the largest dinosaurs carrying their own weight on land. And nobody had ever put numbers on it before. I'm the first person that ever managed to put numbers on it. And it involves a study of weightlifting realities and just the kinds of scaling that you use, to even weight divisions in weightlifting events. Right now, you can excuse the scientists who studied dinosaurs in the early 1900s for not having seen that. Right? I mean, there are not too many paleontologists who work out in gyms, and the sciences of weightlifting sports were not as advanced at that time as they are now. Nonetheless, I can get you a copy of that little thing, which went on for an hour or so. Again, this was on prime time in Japan on a Sunday evening.
Well, on that note, we're going to go to a break here shortly, but folks, his name is Ted Holden, and we're going to get into human origin theorism, a lot of different things. And when we come back, I know that Allison wants to kind of start with the basis so the public listening understands. We've got a lot of drivers. It's rush hour. And when we come back to the Tom Anderson Show, Allison Van Eck, Science Friday, we'll talk with Ted Holden about who is Velikovsky and catastrophists. Let's talk about some of these. There we go. Let's talk about some of these terms, some of the definitions next when we come back, and then we'll get into Ted Holden's theories, and we'll certainly take your calls as well. 907-357-5868. Allison Van Eck, Tom Anderson, Science Friday.
This is the Tom Anderson Show on the Talk of the Valley from 4 to 6 p.m. on KVNT 92.5 FM and 1020 AM. From Matsu to Anchorage, phone lines are open. Dial 357-5868 and join the conversation. Weigh in on the Valley's most popular news and political forum. Are you ready to rumble? Here's Tom Anderson.
We are back. This is Allison Van Eck on the Tom Anderson Show, Science Friday. We have Ted Holden. He is our human origin theorist that I met at the Electric Universe, and he brought up Velikovsky. So in order to even continue, we have to go back just one millistep, and let's talk a little bit about who is Velikovsky and how does he apply to where I met you?
Okay, could I mention one other person's name first before we go any further? Okay, I had help with this book, and the help that I had was quite good. Okay, the co-author's name for Cosmos and Collision is Troy McLaughlin, and Troy and I met basically with discussions on the Thunderbolts website, and those Thunderbolts involved the question of the Purple Dawn age, the age before the modern ages of human history. It's a long story, but we'll get back to that. Immanuel Velikovsky was the founder of modern catastrophism. Okay, he had written a book like in 1950. And here's another interesting case. I'm sorry, it's like maybe I should start that another way. He was a Russian Jew who had ended up, he spoke 7 or 8 languages. He wrote in English better than most of the writing that I see in English ever. He was an associate of Albert Einstein's. He had, along with Albert Einstein, was responsible for one of the major scientific journals in Israel during the 1930s. He ended up at Princeton University along with Albert Einstein. In 1950, he wrote a book which was called Worlds in Collision, which became a runaway international bestseller for a number of weeks, and then it was banned. In other words, Macmillan was, the kinds of things he was talking about were anathema to astronomy departments in major American universities. Right? He was talking about a radical rewrite of the history of our solar system involving planetary scale catastrophes within the last 10,000 years. Particularly a major kind of a catastrophe after the flood, which involved the planet Venus, and people simply didn't want to hear that. Macmillan was told that they had an international runaway bestseller in their hands. They were told to drop it or that they would not be able to sell textbooks in North America. And they handed Worlds in Collision off to Doubleday, which did not have any sort of a textbook division. Now, you can't really ban a book in the United States in 1950. Nonetheless, that's as close as you could possibly come to. And this is a book which is just a pure science book. I mean, there are no pictures of naked people or anything like that running around, right? So, it's a very strange sort of a story. Now,
can you tell us a little bit about when Carl Sagan went up against Velikovsky in a educational setting?
I could talk about that. What I would tell you is that Charles Ginenthal's website gives you literally thousands of pages of that story. That's called EmmanuelVelikovsky.com on the internet. That's a simple thing to remember.
I would certainly encourage people to look that up because it is a very interesting story that I'll admit I was a big fan of Carl Sagan, and I still am. I do look at him very much as the preacher of science that I needed as a kid.
I can talk you out of that very quickly.
But it didn't take me long of listening to what he did to Immanuel Velikovsky to realize that even some heroes have some darker shadows that they would care not to discuss.
Yeah, Ted, this is Tom. Ted Holden, we're talking with Ted Holden on Science Friday, and folks, he's talking about Velikovsky, and he just explained who that gentleman is. Of course, Carl Sagan, billions and billions. He's the late Carl Sagan, but he brought space to America on PBS, on public broadcasting. But Ted, if you can give us a glimpse of what happened, because I think the folks at Rush Hour here in Anchorage and certainly online would be intrigued by what happened, because I'm not familiar with the story.
I can give you a very good glimpse of it. Okay, basically, as recently as 1950, what was being taught in American textbooks was that Venus was a sister planet of the Earth, okay? And just from its position in the solar system, it was assumed that Venus would be 15 or 20 degrees warmer latitude for latitude than the Earth was. And that's what they taught. They taught that it would be, something which you could just land on and start walking around. Right. Immanuel Velikovsky made a radical prediction based on his own theory, which describes Venus as a new planet. He claimed that Venus would be incandescently hot, that it would be, to the point that, nobody's going to land on it and start walking around and be cooked, right? And that it was going to also show the characteristics of a new planet. Now, what do you have on Venus? You have, since the space age got in gear for real, and you started getting reasonable observations and measurements of Venus. You have everything that you would expect from a new planet. You have like a 900 degree surface temperature. you have like a 90 bar CO2 atmosphere. I mean, that says that a wind, a 3 or 4 mile an hour wind would knock you over. You have massive thermal imbalance. You have a massive upwards infrared flux. You have like statistically random cratering. You have a complete lack of regolith. There's no dirt on Venus. And every bit of this is what you would expect from a new planet. Now, when this was discovered, there should have been a line like about 3 or 4 or 5 miles long in front of Emmanuel Velikovsky's door, and scientists just standing in line to apologize. But that didn't happen. What did happen was that Carl Sagan immediately concocted what he calls a super greenhouse theory to describe the 900-degree surface temperature on Venus as being a product of incident sunlight coming through the cloud layers as ultraviolet light and not being able to re-radiate as infrared because of the cloud layers and the density of the CO2 clouds. Now, that's obviously ludicrous. I mean, there's no way to picture that. It's like it would be a violation of the second law of thermodynamics, if nothing else. There's no point in the cloud layers, which is as hot, much less hotter than the surface, right? You've got a situation that just doesn't allow for that. You've had descender probes which have gone all the way to the surface, and what they describe is that in the middle cloud layers, they say pitch black. There's no light whatsoever. Now, they say that you have light increasing in intensity until you get visible light at the surface, but that obviously indicates that the light that you see at the surface of Venus is locally generated. Okay, it's generated by a combination of the heat and electrical reactions. You have lightning discharges, electrical discharges on the surface of Venus, which multiple times per second, which is all over the planet, right? I mean, that's a normal fact of life there. Any sunlight, even if you were to imagine that some tiny modicum of sunlight ever did get through those CO2 clouds, that modicum of sunlight would be like less than a drop in the ocean compared to the light which is being generated locally at the surface. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So in other words, Carl Sagan's super greenhouse theory is still the standard explanation used in science books and in classrooms today, okay, for the 900-degree surface temperature of Venus. It's an anti-theory. It's a theory intended to prevent Emmanuel Velikovsky from receiving any credit for an astonishing prediction, which went against all standard knowledge at the time, and which was based on a theory which is essentially proven out to be correct. You understand the problem?
I do.
This is why people don't like Carl Sagan, and this, like I say, Charles Ginenthal's website goes into this in enormous detail, and you've got a lot of material at that website which is downloadable for free. Okay, that's called EmmanuelVelikovsky.com.
Now, Ted, we have a couple minutes before the next break. We have a hard break forthcoming in about 2.5 with news, and then we'll come back. Ted Holden is our guest. Folks, at Science Friday, we're talking about human origins. We're talking about the cosmos, and Carl Sagan, Velikovsky, Ted Holden. So many folks have theories, and I think we can meet in the middle or not. Allison, you met Ted Holden at the Electric Universe, and I want to ask Ted here briefly before we go to a break, and I know Allison has some questions too. How long have you been part of this Electric Universe group?
Since the middle 1970s.
So it's been around. Allison, how long has it?
Yeah, it's been around a long time. Some of the gentlemen that are currently the voices of the leading charge, they've been doing this since they were in college reading about Velikovsky. David Talbot wrote 10 journals discussing the works of Velikovsky and how maybe we should look a little closer at that work instead of assuming that it's hokey and crazy.
Or that mainstream science and education are the wherewithal and the end all. Now, Ted Holden, before we go to a break, who would you say for the Electric Universe? Not that you're calling on their behalf, but you're part of it. And we've got about 2 minutes left. In that time, tell us, who do you think is the inspiration for the Electric Universe cadre of intellectuals and researchers? Is it Velikovsky?
It's David Talbot.
Boy, nice answer.
Okay. David Talbot. Okay, the website is called thunderbolts.info. Okay, that is the wellspring of every sort of thing like that. That's the most major. I could direct you to 10 or 15 different websites like that, and I'll get some of this information in the way of websites too. Before much longer, there are essentially 3 separate thrusts involved with neo-Velikovskian studies. Okay, you've got the electric universe and the question of electricity in the cosmos. You've got the Saturn theory, or several different versions of the Saturn theory, which is another area of endeavor altogether. And then you've got the question of reconstructing the chronologies of the ancient world, which is Allison, you didn't see this over there at Albuquerque. Okay, the people who involve themselves with chronological studies are another branch of the Velikovskian family. This includes like Charles Ginenthal and Ian Tressman and Gunnar Heinzen and a number of these people, right? I mean, that's another long story.
And Ted, that's where. So those are the three different areas, or the I guess you could say tributaries from the electric universe. We're going to come back and we're going to talk more with Ted Holden, Allison Van Eck, my co-host, and I, folks at Science Friday. If you want to weigh in on this, 907-357-5868. If you're listening online, you can certainly write to the Science World Tom Anderson Show Facebook page or email us, tomandersonalaska@gmail.com. Stay with us. Allison Van Eck, Ted Holden, and I, Tom Anderson. What a Friday. We'll be right back.
3, 2, 1, earth below us, drifting, falling, floating, weightless, calling.
This is the Tom Anderson Show on the Talk of the Valley from 4 to 6 p.m. on KVNT 92.5 FM and 1020 AM. From Matsu to Anchorage, phone lines are open. Dial 357-5868 and join the conversation. Weigh in on the Valley's most popular news and political forum. Are you ready to rumble? Here's Tom Anderson.
And we're back, 4:35 p.m. Folks, it's the holiday season. Whether you're a religious person or not, you got to feel the spirit. 'Tis the season to be jolly, no doubt. Allison Van Eck and I, we have our Christmas trees up, and we have all our bling-bling lights. Science Friday, December 19th. Allison, we have your friend Ted Holden. And, on the break, Ted and I talked, and our producer talked with him, and there's so much more. And you were complimenting him and saying, for all the wallflowers, all the introverts at these science conferences that are smart, that are intellectual, that have a lot to say but don't really know how to do it or are awkward, Ted Holden is very much loquacious and in a good way and informative, and we appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. I was there filming, and I was gathering footage for a film we called Inclusion. And the first thing I can say about Ted is that he's an inclusive fella. He doesn't like to shut other people up. He wants to, let people say what they have to say, because in turn he gets to say what he has to say. And when he brings it, he rocks it. So he doesn't need to take a breath.
You're talking fire in the mountain, run, boy, run. You get into a square dance. Teddy Holden includes everybody. Now, Ted Holden, all joking aside, so let's get back into this. Why don't you develop some of your theories for those listening in Alaska, on the internet, across the region, so they get a bearing, and then we'll interrupt if we have a question or if we have a call, and then we'll go into these breaks. So why don't you go forth, my friend?
We have two websites that you might want to tell people about. One is called cosmosandcollision.com, from which you can order copies of this book of Troy's and mine. The other is a website of Troy McLaughlin's, which is called SaturnDeathCult.com, which talks about the earliest age which humans have any memory of, which is the Purple Dawn Age. And it's mainly people descended from Cro-Magnon civilizations, or societies rather, which have this memory, what you call the dream time or the Purple Dawn. Okay, people descended from Adam and Eve did not have that memory by and large. I mean, they weren't here for it, right? That's a sort of an interesting thing in and of itself. Again, my background was in mathematics. Troy McLaughlin's degrees are in Egyptology, and when somebody has a degree in Egyptology, you know that he's not a yuppie. Okay, you're dealing with something more than a little bit unusual there. He's a very, very bright person. I would categorize him as the brightest person that I've come across, like on the thunderbolts.info website. The question of human origins has always been a kind of a hobby of mine, like what exactly were Neanderthals, Homo erectus, what, if any, relationship could there be between modern humans and those kinds of creatures. And in order to comprehend human origins or to have any sort of a reasonable vision of it, you have to understand the history and prehistory of our solar system itself. Okay, the two are tied together that closely. And almost everything that you learn in school about the nature of solar systems and how they form up is wrong. They teach that solar systems form up from swirling masses of solar material, and that's now understood to be impossible. I mean, that really can't happen. We inherit a number of our ideas about space and the cosmos from scholars 2 or 3 centuries back, particularly the idea of a gravity only or a gravity mainly cosmology, the idea that gravity holds galaxies together, that gravity forms up solar systems from swirling masses of material. They know that that's not workable. Now, they try to invent things like dark matter to try to get by that. The claim is that dark matter is 95% of the universe, try to give something like that a chance to work, but that doesn't really save anything.
Now, you as a mathematician, sir, have a position on that.
Gravity is by 40 orders of magnitude the weakest force in nature. Asking gravity to hold a galaxy together is like asking the littlest kid in the school to do the powerlifting event. It's basically nonsensical. Let me describe how solar systems and stars actually do form up in the universe. Something more than 99.9% of the mass of the universe is in plasma form. This is the fourth state of matter, which is an electrically dissociated state of matter. You get charge separation across vast regions of space, and because of this charge separation, in this plasma environment, extends everywhere pretty much. It's like because of the charge separation, you get electrical currents arcing through these same kinds of gigantic regions of space, and these electrical currents are called Birkeland currents, and they take the form most often of twisted pairs of currents, and they look almost exactly like an RNA-DNA spiral. So you get spiraling pairs of currents.
And I've seen photographs of these.
Okay, so there are 2 words which I would like everybody to at least have heard right. One is called a Birkeland current, which is one of these spiral current pairs. The other is called a Herbig-Haro string. Okay, these are the 2 scholars who first began to study those types of strings, which are created by the Birkeland currents. The names were Herbig and Haro. First names I've got like in that appendix. Give me a second. Let's see if I've got that. George Herbig and Guillermo Haro.
And so for those listening online or for those listening here in Alaska, if you want to follow this, Ted's trying to give you, Ted Holden is our guest, and he's trying to give you, I guess you could say, a map of the research and scientists that are either presenting the theories or have researched it. And Allison, as we weave through this, you had a question for Ted.
Well, and it's not really a question. This is just what we are discussing is basically the foundation of the electric universe theory. It is looking out in space and recognizing these plasma formations as we see them, and it's stuff we can replicate in a laboratory. So essentially, we're making better sense of what we're seeing when we look out into space. When you have these, as you said, a separation of charged regions, and when these arcing events happen over large regions of space, you start to get what we see in the Hubble, these crazy formations.
Okay, let me tell you what happens. I've spoken about Birkeland currents. Now let me tell you about Herbig-Haro strings. The Birkeland currents have electromagnetic pinch points, which you call Z pinch or Z pinch points. Okay, and these like I said, these currents are twisted pairs of currents, and they have points at which they come together. Okay, and those are called the Z pinch points, and those electromagnetic pinch points have more than enough power to agglomerate plasma into reasonably solid objects, stars, protostars, gas giant type planets, right? We know that those things are formed up into Herbig-Haro strings, so that what you see are essentially like these twisted pair currents, and then at these pinch points, stars and protostars, so that you get like beads on a string, right? Now, we're used to thinking of our own solar system as an orbiting system. We've got a sun sitting there, and then you have planets flying around the sun in elliptical orbits, right? Now, this is not the way solar systems form up. This takes a sort of a different turn from what most people are used to thinking of as far as, like, what does a solar system look like?
Now, I heard Ignacio talk about this at the Electric Universe.
I'm sorry?
I heard a gentleman named Ignacio up on stage talking about the stars and protostars forming on what looked like beads, basically chains of beads.
This occurs at different scales. Okay, on a reasonably small scale, a Herbig-Haro string will look like a solar system, only not an orbital solar system, a solar system where you have stars and planets lined up like beads on a string. At the largest possible scale, you get strings of galaxies, where the thing that you see at the pinch points is not an individual star or protostar or gas giant planet. It's the whole galaxy. Okay, and these strings of galaxies, more often than not, retain the helical form of the Birkeland current which created them. Now, in a gravity-only cosmology, there's no way to explain a string of galaxies. In other words, if it's gravity that holds galaxies and anything else, groups of things together in the universe, then there's no conceivable way.
Well, guess what? You're going to, and you can't even describe it yet. Guess why, Ted Holden? Because we're going to have to go to a break. We're going to come right back. This one's a quick one. Ted Holden, human origin theorist. Folks, this is dynamic stuff, and it's important to you. It's about humanity in the universe. What's more important than that? The primordial ooze. Allison Van Eck, Tom Anderson, Science Friday, Ted Holden. We'll be right back.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade.
This is the Tom Anderson Show on the Talk of the Valley from 4 to 6 p.m. on KVNT 92.5 FM and 1020 AM. From Matsu to Anchorage, phone lines are open. Dial 357-5868 and join the conversation. Weigh in on the Valley's most popular news and political forum. Are you ready to rumble? Here's Tom Anderson.
And we are back. This is the Tom Anderson Show, Science Friday, with me, Allison Van Eck. We got Ted Holden on the line, somebody I met at the Electric Universe Conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2014 March. We had a lot of fun, did we not, sir?
Oh, no question.
Absolutely. Well, folks, we have one more hour, and we're going to continue delving into this. Ted Holden doesn't typically get on radio shows for 2 hours because he has a lot to say, and he's a very busy man in a lot of different fields, but we're really blessed with him this evening. So if you do have a question, call in 907-357-5868. Otherwise, sit back and enjoy. Ted, we're going to go. We got about 12 minutes on this segment, and Allison, why don't you take over in terms of some of the direction you want to go?
So what we were talking about before the break was a discussion of Birkeland currents. And I'm sorry, the string, there was
Herbig-Haro, Herbig/HARO.
Herbig-Haro strings.
Now, what these are electrical currents which take the form of twisted pairs, and the pinch points of those currents, which are regular and which have the power, the electromagnetic power to agglomerate plasma into larger bodies, more solid bodies, stars, protostars, gas giant type planets. Okay, that says that the original form of solar systems is not what we see with our own solar system. And, what we see with our own solar system is what you expect with an older system, which is an orbiting system. The early types of solar systems which you see take the form of an electrical twisted pair current and bodies along the electromagnetic pinch points of those currents. Okay, so it looks like beads on a string.
Now, I think that it's very important to point out that when you say helical and these twisted currents, it is important to note that galaxies specifically take what looks very much like a nautilus shell. It has a spiral. Everywhere we look in nature, what we see is a Fibonacci sequence unfold. So these spirals are very connected to the issue of how these forces are at play. To say that gravity is creating Fibonacci, when we see Fibonacci in electrical activity, it's almost like blaming an obvious killer, somebody who's not the obvious killer when the obvious killer is standing in the room. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. Now, we actually have a Herbig-Haro string going through the center of our own galaxy, which is called the Double Helix Nebula. Okay, and it's very likely that is the power source for our own galaxy. Now, the other thing that I mentioned is that on a very large scale, you have Herbig-Haro strings at which the pinch points are not forming individual stars, they're forming galaxies, right? And you call these strings of galaxies. It's the same phenomenon, only on a larger scale, okay? Let me get to our own solar system, what it looked like 50, 60, 70,000 years ago. Because if you were to believe that our solar system had formed the way they teach in schools, like from a swirling mass of solar material, you would expect the spin axes of the various planets to be upright. You would expect them to be roughly perpendicular to the plane of the system. And that's not what we find. The Sun and Jupiter and Mercury do look like that. The axis tilts of those bodies are less than 10 degrees. You've got two bodies in the system whose axis tilts are anomalous, which have their own special stories. That would be Venus, which I mentioned as being a new planet, right? This is formed after all of this happened. And then Uranus, which has some other kind of a story. Both of those, Venus is upside down. The axis tilt is like 180 degrees roughly. Uranus is like over on one side, 90-some degrees. But you've got these other four main planets, which are Neptune, Saturn, Mars, and Earth, which all have the same rough 26, I call it a rough 26-degree axis tilt, ranges from about 23.5, 24 to about 27, 27.5, something like that, right? They're all basically, visually it's the same. So that here, there's a logical explanation as to why you would be seeing that if you understand the history of our system the way I've just described it in the form of a Herbig-Haro string. The idea is that at some point this original Herbig-Haro string of our own solar system split into northern and southern parts. The southern part broke off into what you would call into a 26-degree. In other words, it was laying off at a 26-degree angle from the northern part of the system. Okay, at some point, the southern part of the system was captured by the sun and its system, and it simply flew into the plane of the sun's system at a 26-degree angle from the south. And as the individual bodies spun out and began to orbit the way that they do now, they simply kept the 26-degree angle. You understand what I'm saying? That's sort of an obvious kind of a thing. Here's what that means. That says that our original solar system was in two parts. There was a northern part, which was very bright, because you're looking at the sun. And the other thing that you would be seeing in that northern system is that Jupiter would have been almost certainly within the habitable zone of the sun, okay, as well as the bodies which orbit Jupiter would also have been within the habitable zone of the sun. Okay, the normal thing within our galaxy is for gas giant planets to orbit their stars substantially closer than Jupiter or Saturn do today. Okay, and without the other bodies in the system, 60, 80,000 years ago, then you would expect Jupiter to be in a tighter orbit than it is now. Okay, so you've got a very bright sort of a system. Particularly for anybody or anything living on one of these large moons of Jupiter, it's like they would have had light both from the sun and from the dwarf star. Okay, you have to understand that Jupiter and Saturn were both dwarf stars, if you go back, 60, 70, 80,000 years ago. And then you've got a very dark sort of a universe in the southern system, right? You've got like Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Mars, Earth, and essentially you've still got this electrical linear system, right, which is not an orbiting system at all. You've got like Mars and Earth within the heliosphere of the brown dwarf star, what Saturn would have been under those circumstances, within the heliosphere, the plasma sheath, right? In other words, you've got its own little universe. You've got a deep purple sort of a world. You've got, you're not going to freeze to death. It's warm enough. You've got radiant energy from the dwarf star, which would bounce off of this plasma sheath and then come back to the planets from all angles. In other words, there would be no really cold place on the Earth at that time.
And so to clarify, this would in great part explain some of the historical stuff you read about the Native Americans and their time, the dream time, and the purple skies.
Dawn.
Now, I've also heard
dawn.
some support of this theory in that they found mushrooms that literally were 100 feet tall. Mushrooms. The predominant species of flora on the planet at that time was fungus, because we didn't have the direct sunlight. And this also is so kind of falls in line with the electric universe theories, looking at the discussions of the planet Saturn being a god figure to the people of Earth at that time and departing as God figure as a new sun came into play. Obviously,
you've got more than one prehistoric age there, Allison. Okay, look, it's like you've got like the Golden Age, which they talk about, which is the age between Adam and Noah, right, which is the classical Golden Age, which Hesiod and Ovid and Plato and all your classical authors wrote about. And then you've got, before that, you've got this Purple Age, which nobody really wrote about. We find that in the oral traditions of Cro-Magnon descendants. Okay, it's like you have creatures which were adapted to that kind of reality, having huge eyes. Neanderthal and other hominid eye sockets much larger than ours, 2 or 3 times. Right, every single one of the dinosaurs had these same kinds of huge eye sockets and these same, presumably, huge eyes, including herbivores, including the flying dinosaurs. Okay, so that every sort of creature which lived in that age was adapted to a very deep sort of darkness. If you read the works of Lord Byron, he says that the Assyrian came down from like a wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, which is supposedly the royal colors, right? And the explanation for gold and purple being the royal colors that you find in textbooks is sort of lame. Like it's only kings and royalty that could afford purple dye. Well, we've had purple berries on the earth forever. Purple and gold were the royal colors because these were the 2 primary colors of the sky in these 2 past ages. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
So you've got explanations for some of these things that you see in our own world. Saturn and Jupiter, right? If you were to go to some kind of a place where primitive people gather today and to say, guys, it's like I need an astral religion. I mean, every one of these old religions, from recorded history was astral in nature. They were worshiping things which they saw in the skies. You go up and say, guys, $100 a piece, I need you to devise an astral religion straight off the tops of your head. I need some kind of religion which is going to amount to worshiping things that I see in the sky. Well, the 2 things we're going to come up with for worship are going to be the sun and the moon. I mean, that's obvious, right? It's like
easy pickings.
Most humans alive today can find Venus, right? That's like, I would say, maybe a third to whatever might could ever find Jupiter. And very few people could find Saturn in today's world. But the 2 chieftain gods of every one of those ancient religious systems were Jupiter and Saturn. They weren't the sun and the moon.
All of a sudden, those little dots in the sky were meaningful to people. Why would those tiny little dots way out there be meaningful to people? Because they weren't tiny dots.
Ted, we got to hold the thought because we got we got to break and we got to pay the bills here. So it's the Tom Anderson Show. Ted Holden, he's going to patiently wait through top of the hour news. We've got Glenn Beck's The Blaze. Then we're going to come back with Allison Van Eck. And, folks, I don't know what can get more engaging than talking about human origin, talking about galaxy strings, talking about some of the theorists that have inspired Ted Holden and the founders of the Electric Universe in the conference. I know that another one's coming up. When we come back in the second hour, we'll get into how you can attend the Electric Universe conference, where that's going to be. We'll talk more with Ted Holden about his theories and how you might find more information beyond purchasing his book. He'll repeat some of the websites, some of the researchers out there. Hey, some people call him crazy. Some people call him the next generation of intellects. Maybe there's some truth in the middle of that. Maybe you're a complete wonk on this stuff. We'll certainly have this on YouTube on our Tom Anderson Show Science World channel. We'll give you that information too when we come back. Ted Holden, Allison Van Eck. Folks, happy holidays. One more hour. Stay with us. Science Friday.